Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Webinar 9. I am Dr. Melissa Joyce Rambuanga, Publicity Chair of Ako Para sa Bata 2020. The 12th Ako Para sa Bata is presented by the Child Protection Network Foundation and UNICEF. Our theme this year is Care of the Child Against Violence in the Time of Disease. Please follow the Ako Para sa Bata social media accounts for updates and other announcements. And if you will post about the Ako Para sa Bata webinars, please include the hashtag COVID APSB 2020. That's hashtag COVID APSB 2020. Today is another day of learning. To those who joined the previous Ako Para sa Bata webinars, welcome back. And for the first-timers, welcome to the Ako Para sa Bata community. On behalf of the Child Protection Network Foundation and UNICEF, we are grateful for each and every one of you. The Ako Para sa Bata 2020 webinars are a service to the Women and Children Protection Unit members and the entire Ako Para sa Bata community. We are deeply grateful for your support. Ako, tayo, para sa bata. The moderator of today's webinar is Miss Dolly, Dr. Ma'am Dolores B. Rubia, the Director of Aftercare Development of the International Justice Mission Philippines. Miss Dolly.
Good morning, everyone. The Ako Para sa Bata community, the attendees logged in Zoom, and those joining us on Facebook Live, welcome. We're glad that you could join us today. This is the 9th webinar of Ako Para sa Bata 2020. As mentioned by Dr. Mel, a total of 23 webinars will be presented by the Child Protection Network Foundation and UNICEF. This is the first of the 3-part series on case management of child victims of abuse, neglect, and exploitation during the COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines. We will be discussing social work issues and solutions. This is a 1.5-hour session, and the objectives are to explain the consequences of COVID-19 on the social workers' management of cases of child abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and to discuss best practices and innovative solutions implemented to address challenges in handling cases during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Let's begin. Let me introduce you to our first speaker. Our first speaker is an assistant professor of the Department of Social Work, College of Social Work and Community Development at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She's also an author of various local and international publications on child protection and social welfare systems. Here to discuss impacts of COVID-19 on child protection case management, issues, challenges, and trends, let us welcome Professor Florence Flores Pasos.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dolly, for that very kind introduction. And I would like to thank you for having me here. Kumusta po kayong lahat? Salamat naman po at napaunlakan ninyo itong mga webinar ng Ako Para sa Bata. The current demands of the COVID-19 crisis have posed an additional layer of issues and problems on individuals, families, communities, and societies. Consequently, the crisis has adversely impacted on social work case management, particularly on child protection case management. At the same time, emerging trends can potentially improve the system despite the many issues and challenges along the way. My presentation is entitled The Impact of COVID-19 on Child Protection Case Management, Issues, Challenges, and Trends. The objectives of this presentation are, number 1, to present the impact of COVID-19 on families and children, and the areas of social work case management that have been adversely affected by the pandemic. And number 2, to discuss the implications and emerging trends that can potentially improve the case management system of organizations amid the pandemic. This presentation hopes to be able to influence policy in order to support the organizations more and even the social workers or social service workforce at the supply side and at the clientele in the communities at the demand side in order to ensure the delivery of the best possible service to the client systems. The data used in this presentation came from a survey with selected social workers of child-focused NGOs as respondents and online secondary data. In relation to child protection case management as the focus of my presentation, let me first present a social work theoretical framework or perspective that should be used by child protection case managers in trying to assess the situation of children and in planning interventions. Social work is focused on helping improve the social functioning of individuals. As such, they adopt the person in situation or person in environment paradigm that recognizes that the individual is in constant interaction with his or her environment. And in the process of doing so, the individual sometimes does not have enough resources or coping capacities to respond to the demands and pressure coming from the environment. When the individual loses his or her equilibrium and could not possibly cope, his or her social functioning is affected. Social workers mediate or intervene by addressing deficiencies at the level of the individual and or at the level of the environment or both. The systems approach or systems theory in social work is based on the idea that a person's behavior, development, and welfare are influenced by a variety of factors caused by different environmental systems. In this particular theoretical approach to social workers observe and analyze the many systems that contribute to the person's behavior, development, and welfare at the micro, meso, and macro levels. In relation to COVID-19, social workers need to look at different systems and their realities that influence the child, which is the focus of this presentation. I particularly mentioned the child because um, I have been working with uh, children and families in community-based programs, and I consider myself as a child rights advocate. So I really focus on children, and my topic is on child protection. Um, Systems such as the family, the community, that includes the neighborhood, the peers, the school, and other institutions and organizations are part of the environment of the children. No? Altogether, these systems influence the child, and in return, the child can also influence the system. So this is the organizing theory that social workers use in trying to analyze, to assess the situation of marginalized sectors in order to determine what interventions to provide. So particularly now that we have this pandemic, it's important to analyze all these uh, issues and problems that we have in relation to children and the children's environment. So this is an illustration of the systems framework where we could see the particular concerns that we need to look at or analyze in relation to the welfare of children during the pandemic, no? So children are definitely vulnerable to so many issues. However, they can be protected by the different environmental systems that they are in. So they can be protected by the family, by the community, by society, and in relation to the global context, in determining the influence of the global context to all the issues being faced by the children in relation to child protection, it's also important to look at the realities at the global context, no? So to start with, we already know that the pandemic has affected the global community, no? That is why it is called the pandemic. Hundreds of countries have been affected so far. And we know that global policies might change because of this, affecting other countries who are dependent on other countries. So there may be a shift of focus of funders and donors, thereby affecting organizations that provide services to children. No? In relation to the level of society, or in the Philippines at the national level, we are we should be looking at the ECQ policy and protocols. Are these policies and protocols helpful towards the delivery of services to children, particularly child protection? The COVID-19 national response mechanisms, are there effective response mechanisms developed and implemented at the national level? Kumusta ang economy, politics, and culture that also affect families and other sectors? And most of all, policy implementation. We know for a fact that one of the major policies that we are having now in relation to COVID is the provision of social amelioration support to the affected families. So we should check if this is being translated into a very efficient service delivery system. If not, so we should consider influencing it, no? So at the community level, we should look at the availability of social services. UNICEF said that because of the pandemic, social protection mechanisms have been weakened. Nag-stop ang mga trabaho ng mga local government units, mga organizations sa private sector, and NGOs, no? Because of the pandemic. So we should really look into that. Kumusta ang school and education situation? We know for a fact that the education system has also ceased operating, and there's another modality in terms of trying to continue the education of children. Local government, private, and community-initiated COVID-19 response mechanisms, are they in place? So at the family level, what is the impact of COVID-19 on the socio-economic situation of families? Definitely, marami yan. So we will look into the details sa mga susunod na slides. Kumusta ang access to social services? Access to technology, the psychosocial condition of families and the members, no? Psychosocial in a sense that the stress levels of family members may have heightened, no? Nag-increase ang stress levels because of COVID. Hindi lamang dahil sa information gap, no? Minsan hindi alam kung ano nangyayari, particularly yung mga bata. Pero doon sa nawalang income at nagkaroon ng additional layer of stresses for family members apart from other social implications. So more importantly, there's a need to look into the level of the children, the most vulnerable sector that we have, no? So has there been a chance or an opportunity for adults to look into the emotions, reactions, and behaviors and ask the children how they feel about the pandemic? Normally, children are just relegated to the periphery, so they are not being involved in discussions about certain things, especially that it is a crisis situation. No? So let us look into this. And then the physical health condition of the children, nutrition level, education and development, interactions, relationships, and enjoyment of their rights in general. For social workers, this approach is very effective. Why? Because in trying to manage cases, there is a need to look into these different aspects of a child's life. No, the environment is very important, and it's also important to look into the child so that case management can come up with different responses and coordinate services to holistically respond to the situation of children and families. So let us talk about child protection. We already know that there are so many issues surrounding the child, no? The child as the focus of this presentation. So in relation to child protection, there's a need to look into a framework, no, of child protection. But first, let us define it. No? So when we say child protection or protection, it is protection of children from abuse, exploitation, violence, and neglect. So these four concepts constitute violence against children. No? When we talk about child protection, we talk about the safety of the child. So this is the key word, the safety of the child that we should ensure all the time. To give details on the impact of COVID on children and families, this is a conceptual framework that yours truly developed in order to just present or illustrate the impacts. No? So we have a situation here. COVID-19 has been with us since January 2020, but we just started responding to it on a policy level in March, right? Because of COVID, there has been a lockdown. So policy yan ng ating national government, no? So lockdown means we should be staying in our respective homes. So merong community quarantine na sinasabi. And this quarantine has protocols. Of course, alam natin na biglaan. It's a crisis situation. No? And almost everybody is not really prepared to face the consequences of having a lockdown. So as to the protocols, we are advised to do physical distancing. If ever we are in interaction with other people, even in our own homes, we should do physical distancing or 1 meter apart from each other. And then the wearing of face mask is mandated, no? Because face mask protects us from the droplets that come from sneezing and others, no? And then the cough etiquette should be considered also. Washing of hands is very important, and disinfecting and isolation. So these are the protocols that need to be observed by all Filipinos practically because of the lockdown. So there are two aspects that we can look into in trying to determine the impact of this lockdown and having these protocols and policies to families in the Philippines. No? So first, the socioeconomic situation, and second, the psychosocial situation. In terms of the socioeconomic impact, we know that there has been a massive loss of livelihood among families, especially those marginalized families. No? Because of that, there are economic hardships. All of a sudden, families do not know how to feed their children, the members of the family, to take care of the sick members, and to really go on with their day-to-day lives because of the pandemic, no, and the protocols. Disruption in education, we know very well what happened to that. So, uh, ang mga bata hindi na pumasok sa school, lack of access to information. Ito, lack of access to information, it is really one of the indicators of poverty, yung access to information. Pero minsan, hindi natin minomonitor. But this time around, it's very important kasi napipilitan na tayo na gumamit na lang talaga ng ating mga television, radio, and other information mechanisms para malaman ano yung nangyayari kasi hindi na tayo makalabas. So hindi na tayo possibly pwede makipag-usap sa iba maliban lang sa ating mga family members. No? Definitely, there has been a disruption in lifestyle. Yung sinabi ko kanina na nung dineclare yung lockdown, hindi ka na pwedeng lumabas. Napaka-drastic ng change. So, minsan, doon sa psyche ng mga tao, hindi nila kaagad matanggap yan at gusto nila yung dating lifestyle, itutuloy pa rin, lalabas pa rin, mamimili pa rin, magtatrabaho. So, medyo maraming stresses doon sa bagay na yon, no? Because of the disruption in lifestyle. So those are just among the impacts. So marami pang iba, but these are the major ones. In relation to the psychosocial conditions or situations of families and members of the family, no? So we know na nababalitaan natin sa televisions na merong mga increased social conflicts. You remember a case doon sa Quezon City, isang barangay, lumabas sa mga tao because they have been informed that there is a distribution of relief assistance, only to find out na wala naman, so nagkaroon ng some form of a riot or paguluhan kung saan nahuli pa yung ibang mga leaders. And among family members and community members, we know that there have been conflicts, lalo na doon sa paghihintay ng mga households sa announcement ng LGUs tungkol sa kailan darating ang ayuda at yung iba pang mga pangangailangan nila na hindi nasasagutan, nagpo-cause yun ng conflict. No? Mental health is affected. May mga nag-express through the social media tungkol sa kanilang mga stresses, no? And some have been depressed, nagkakaroon ng anxieties because of this pandemic. And the coping capacities of people have been definitely challenged. So, maski saan mo tignan, talagang adverse effects ang nangyari, no? Nagkaroon ng adverse impact ang COVID-19 sa buhay ng mga tao. When it comes to the children, alam natin na ang mga bata, so nag-stay sila muna sa bahay at they are at risk of different issues on safety, no? For example, hindi lang naman because they are there in the homes, pero dahil na rin dun sa mga problemang dala ng COVID, no? Sa socio-economic situation ng families, there's a risk na mane-neglect ang mga pangangailangan ng mga bata. For example, yung food, yung shelter, no? Especially those who are already informal settlers, walang security sa kanilang mga tahanan, no? Health and nutrition, maaring ma-neglect kasi wala na silang resources to support. Noon pa nga may trabaho ang mga family members dun sa marginalized communities. Hindi pa nga nila kayang i-support fully ang mga pangangailangan ng mga bata in relation to this aspect, no? Mga needs nila for physiological development, yung kanilang mga medical concerns, health concerns, education, information, and psychosocial needs. So maaaring ma-neglect lahat ito. Then we have this issue of abuse. We know that according to studies, ang mga nakakapag-abuso sa bata ay more pa nga na yung mga close sa bata, di ba? So halimbawa, nandun lang sila sa loob ng bahay, there's a risk na yung bata ay mas magkakaroon ng experience in physical abuse. Mainit ang ulo ng mga parents, hindi nila makita yung relevance nung o kaya nung yung importance ng pagte-take care sa mga bata at this point in time, no? Yung verbal abuse, no? Pag minumura nila, psychological, kinukonsensya, and then sexual particularly, no? Right now, there's an issue about online sexual exploitation of children kasi dahil doon sa paggamit ng mga online mechanisms, mas at risk. Ang sabi ng ating ng mga studies, triple ang or even more ang level of risk ng mga bata when it comes to sexual abuse maski online or sa cyberspace, no? So exploitation is also part of the issues. Nabanggit ko na yung online sexual exploitation, child labor because of the necessity to really look for mga pang-support sa mga food daily kung walang ayuda. Minsan nadadrag ang mga bata sa pagtatrabaho. Although hindi allowed kasi lockdown nga, pero meron pa ring risk, no? There's a risk na mata-traffic. There are families na naeengganyo na ipadala na lang ang mga bata sa ibang lugar because they can no longer support them. So kukunin naman ng mga taong nagmamalasakit. Pero in the long run, malalaman na ano pala, nagamit sila for child labor, for prostitution, and other means na exploit sila. And then violence. So there's a risk na yung mga bata, mas nawi-witness nila ang violence sa home, no? So pwedeng domestic violence, pwedeng mga crimes at pati sa neighborhood at bullying, no? Pwedeng yung cyberbullying ang ma-experience nila. So why are we talking about these issues? Because these are the very issues that child protection wants to respond to. At babantayan natin dahil panahon talaga ng pandemic at doble-doble, triple-triple ang risk ng bata na ma-experience nila itong mga issues on child protection na to, no? So kapag naalagaan sana natin ang mga bata na karoon tayo ng awareness on these issues and corresponding response, then we can ensure na yung outcome ay children's rights are not compromised, no? Pero kapag hindi natin nasagutan ito, alam natin na yung mga bata ay sila yung biggest victims ng pandemic because they are so vulnerable depending on their age and they need really the protection of adults. Now, case management is a response to child protection issues. Sa social work interventions, it's not possible to provide a holistic intervention unless magkakaroon ka ng case management approach, no? Case management system sa loob ng isang organization. So, tingnan natin kung ano yung definitions muna. According to our child protection protocol na led by DOJ in the Philippines, case management is a procedure. So, procedure siya, no? Ibig sabihin, proseso, merong mga steps na dapat pagdaanan to plan, to seek and monitor services from different social agencies and staff in behalf of a client. Ano to? Sanga-sangang coordination. Because social workers want to provide the best possible services to clients or to the children. No? Usually, one agency takes primary responsibility for the client and assigns a case manager who coordinates services, advocates for the client, and sometimes controls resources and purchases services for the client. This just shows that case management should be done in the context of the organization or an organization na nagte-take ng primary responsibility at siya rin ang magko-coordinate through the social workers sa different organizations kung saan pwedeng makakuha pa ng mga services, no? Ililink yung clients or yung children sa iba't ibang mga services. So case management is a complex task. However, it is very fulfilling, no? Ano naman yung child protection case management? Kasi kanina in general terms yung pagkaka-define, no? So when it comes to child protection case management, ito yung coordinated service delivery approach at the individual and household level. So take note, it's not only at the level of children, but also at the level of households. Kasi sila yung nag-take care sa mga bata. So malaki ang influence ng household sa buhay ng mga bata at sa safety nila. Involving the identification of vulnerable children, assessment and planning, referral to services and follow-up in collaboration with the family, community, and other service providers. So ang nadagdag lang dito ay yung pag-identify ng vulnerable children. Sila yung ipoprotect kasi sila yung maraming risks. So ang case management activities ay apat it entails 4 activities, no? Case management. Number 1, yung assessment and planning. We cannot do case management unless we assess. Diba? So social workers start the intervention, the helping process by assessing the situation of the client. Data gathering ang importante dyan para malaman kung anong different situations ng bata, no? And then the data will inform the social worker kung ano ang problema. Ano ang core problem, ang immediate problem ng mga bata needing protection, and yung mga underlying problems, and also the corresponding effects na nagpo-pose din ng different problems. So, ganon ang pag-a-assess, no? Titignan ko ano yung pinaka-immediate, yung short term at saka long term na mga problems na dapat tugunan. So, yung assessment will influence planning. the planning of interventions. Assessment and planning would be one group of activities, then implementation and monitoring. Implementation means kapag may interventions na na-plan for the clients, ay kailangang isagawa, no? Habang isinasagawa, minomonitor if the interventions are being implemented as planned, kung ano yung pwedeng improve in the process. So that is the purpose of monitoring, no? Tracking also the progress of every implementation. When it comes to the documentation, ito yung bahagi ng trabaho ng social worker na kino-consider na very challenging kasi every step of the way, nagdo-document ka, nagdo-journal ka, lalo na kapag nasa case management, meron ka kasing plans, di ba? So when you implement them, you have to document how you implemented. So that merong paper trail, meron talagang historical account ng mga interventions at yung progress, no? So there are many types of documentations. We already know that, mga social workers and social development workers. Minsan, yan ang ating mga limitations, no, yung pagdo-document because we have so many clients na hindi na natin nabibigyan ng panahon yung documentation, but we really need them, particularly the social case study report na nagkakaroon ng mga progress reports. Then we do referral and follow-up in case management. Definitely, this set of activities, yung referral and follow-up, very important yan because we want to ensure that the service delivery is completed, no? Hindi lamang sapat na ililink natin yung client sa mga services, we should ensure that the services have been provided and the client has already received those services. Okay, so this is just to remind us of the case management activities. According to DOJ, doon sa ating Child Protection Protocol, may mga approaches dapat tayong gagamitin in the management of cases of neglect, abuse, and exploitation. Okay, so ito yung mga approaches, no? Because we know that ang mga social workers hindi lamang sila masaya na isa ang naibibigay nilang serbisyo, lalo na kapag napaka-complex ang sitwasyon at problema ng mga kliyente. So bagay na bagay sa atin talaga itong mga approaches na to, no? Holistic care. We should ensure full or optimum development of the child, considering the physical, social, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual development. So when we do child protection case management, hindi lamang yung sinasabing safety ng bata, kundi tingnan din lahat ng aspeto ng kanyang buhay. Because hindi rin naman din yung obvious na safety ang tinitignan natin na hindi siya maabuso, hindi siya ma-exploit, kundi kapag siya ay na-neglect ang kanyang mga pangangailangan for food, hindi na rin siya safe, hindi na rin siya magiging healthy. So yun ang ibig sabihin, no? It should be holistic care kapag tayo ay nag-case manage. So number 2, yung rights-based and life cycle approach. So we should ensure that the rights of the child are upheld throughout the different stages of the child's growth and development. Actually, almost lahat naman ng mga programa natin sa ating government na sinusundan din ng mga non-government organizations ay child rights based na. Kasi nga meron tayong mga legislative measures and also legislative frameworks na nagsasabi na we should adhere to the standards of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So meron tayong Third National Plan of Action for Children na naka-anchor dun sa children's rights. So ito yung nagbibigay ng guidance sa mga planners, lalo na sa mga duty bearers of children's rights kung ano yung mga principles na gagamitin nila at ano yung mga components na ilalagay nila sa kanilang mga programa na rights-based, no? So, naka-note dito na ensure the participation of the child in all processes. This is personally my campaign, no? Yung child participation. Among the major rights of children na survival, development, protection, and participation rights would be one of the most neglected. No? Hindi natin makikita na tinatarget ng mga local government units and other service providers, hindi nila ginagawa ng budget or programs ang child participation. but children should participate in all levels of decision making because sila yung pinag-uusapan eh. Buhay nila yan. So they should be part of it. Yung mga views nila, yung kanilang mga opinions, kailangan ma-take into consideration and their general welfare. So that is the rights-based approach. And then case management should be family and community-based. Wala na siguro mas gaganda pa dito kasi preventive siya in nature kapag doon sa community nagkaroon ng case management, no? So it recognizes that families and communities are the first line of response in dealing with problems of children. Thus, interventions should strengthen the capabilities of families and communities to care for them. Imagine kapag ang mga families ang naging strong in protecting their children and providing all their needs, ibig sabihin, hindi na kailangan pang i-concern ng ibang mga sectors ang mga bata kasi sa sarili nilang pamilya, nako-contain na ang protection, okay? Na-ensure na. But we can only do that kapag community-based ang mga programs natin. Gender-sensitive approach. Marami na rin gumagamit ng gender-responsive, gender-sensitive approach. We really need this kasi among the issues faced by children, particularly girl children and boy children na marami na rin issues sa ngayon, ay yung mga issues on gender. Kaya yun ang nagiging dahilan kung bakit mas nagiging vulnerable sila, no? Yung mga pananaw ng society, ng mga tao sa kababaihan at yung patriarchal system natin dito sa Pilipinas, no? Ang kultura natin. Gender-sensitive approach is the ability to recognize girls and women's perceptions, experiences, and interests may be different from those of boys and men, arising from an understanding of their different social position and gender roles. So kung sakali na iintindihin natin yung mga gender issues, gender biases, and gender roles, mas akma yung mapoprovide natin na services and interventions sa mga bata. Okay? Lastly, it should be a multidisciplinary approach. No? So ito napakaganda kasi partnerships and collaborations are needed in case management. This approach recognizes that children, particularly those in need of special protection, need access to an wide array of services due to the multifaceted nature of their needs. So, di ba, doon sa ginamit natin na framework na systems framework, nakita natin kung gaano kadami ang mga concerns and problems na kinapapalooban ng bata, hindi lamang sa sarili niya, kundi sa pamilya niya, sa komunidad niya, etc. etc. So kailangan nating talagang magkaroon ng multidisciplinary approach. No? Hindi lamang yung pagbibigay halimbawa ng health services, kailangan ng education, kailangan ng psychosocial services, etc. Many agencies and professionals need to work together with mutual responsibilities and joint accountability for managing the different aspects of helping a child within the context of the family, community, and society. Tingnan natin yung child protection case management system na pinanukala ng DOJ-led child protection protocol or system in the Philippines, no? Or child protection program pala, no? Ito daw ang dapat makita na components ng child protection case management system sa mga organizations, no? Or kung sino man yung mga magpo-provide ng case management services, no? So dapat merong policy framework. Ang policy framework consists of laws and policies relevant to child protection. In the Philippines, alam natin na napakadami ng policies on child protection. We have RA 7610, yung mother law on child protection, and other specific laws. So hindi na natin problema talaga ang mga batas. There is a good policy enabling environment for the implementation of programs for child protection. Yung pangalawang component is yung process of care. So kailangan nating tignan ang process of care. Ito yung paano ang service delivery ay na-organize, no? So kapag tayo ba ay nag-provide ng services, is it something na binibigay lang ng isang ahensya or yung ahensya ay merong coordination with other agencies para ililink siya. So ano yung proseso? Okay, so pwede rin namang one-stop shop, pero dapat sundin yung holistic, multidisciplinary, no? Pero sa ngayon, parang wala pa yung one-stop shop. There has to be one organization taking care of a certain client and then ililink niya sa different services. So yung process of care is very important. I-define yan as a component ng child protection system. Yung structures, ito yung component that refers to the existence of and coordination between organizations. So ito naman yung mga organization. Paano na-structure yung coordination ng mga organizations implementing child protection policies? So meron ba silang mga agreements na ganito ang susundan nila na process, and then ito yung mga requirements na gagamitin. So paano na-structure yung kanilang pagtutulungan, no? Paano na-organize. Okay, so there has to be a clear delineation of roles among organizations also. Sa accountability, this is a very important component of child protection system, no? It pertains to standards, okay? Complaint mechanisms, data systems, and monitoring and evaluation. Isang kahinaan natin dito sa Pilipinas, based dun sa aking mga pag-aaral, pagtingin sa mga progress na ginagawa tungkol sa child protection and child rights implementation. Yung kahinaan ng ating monitoring and evaluation system, hindi natin talaga nasa-set yung mga indicators at nafa-follow through, no? In the same manner, yung mga standards natin in ensuring effective and efficient child protection systems ay hindi rin gaano namomonitor. Kaya maraming mga ahensya na maski meron silang mga programa on child protection, ay mahirap ma-renew yung kanilang mga accreditation because they fall out. Kumbaga, hindi nila namimit yung standards set by the DSWD. No? And even inside the organization, meron dapat mga standards and indicators. So, kailangan tignan kasi at the end of the day, ito yung magsasabi kung effective or efficient ang service delivery system ng isang ahensya or agency. Yung continuum of care, ito naman yung nagpe-pertain sa services na available. So dapat merong iba't ibang serbisyo para sa promotion ng children's rights, promotion ng child protection. Merong prevention programs, merong response. Response means meron ng mga problema kailangan mong tugunan. So ano yung mga programa dito at serbisyo? And then yung rehabilitation or aftercare programs. Rehabilitation, very important yan, no? And then it's not only rehabilitation, pero halimbawa, inilagay mo ang isang bata na naabuso sa loob ng center para ma-rehabilitate, no? After rehabilitation, ibabalik mo siya, i-reintegrate mo siya sa kanyang pamilya at komunidad. Merong aftercare services din na kailangan at i-coordinate lahat yan ng social workers. So yan yung nagsasabi na yung continuum of care, sinasabi lang niya na dapat kompleto ang continuum ng services na pwede natin i-provide sa larangan ng child protection. Hindi lamang siya prevention, hindi lamang response. Okay? Dito sa capacities, as a last component, nagre-refer ito sa human, financial, and material resources to carry out the work. Sa panahon ng pandemic, ang pinaka-apektado ngayon ay itong, when it comes to capacities, ay yung mga social workers. Hindi sila handa to do child protection continuously na hindi sila pumupunta sa communities. Masakit sa looban ng isang social worker na hindi niya nadadalaw ang mga pamilya, ang mga bata, kung child protection nga ito talaga, at hindi makalabas ng bahay. No? So capacities, talagang affected yan among social workers and also organizations. So ito yung mga components na dapat natin makita na kung ide-design ng mga organizations ang kanilang case management system, mahalaga na ito ang mga titignan kung kumpleto ba. Ngayon, ginamit ko ito para makapag gather ng data. No? Ito yung mga ginamit kong components din para makita kung ano yung sitwasyon. So ito na nga yung conceptual framework na ginamit ko para ma-determine yung impact ng COVID sa child protection case management. Tiningnan ko yung components ng capacity, structures, process of care, and continuum of protection. Yung 4 among the 6 components na ito yung mga major na kailangang tignan. No? So ini-introduce ko dito itong supply and demand na concepts. When it comes to supply, dapat makita na when it comes to capacities, ano ngayon ang sitwasyon ng mga ahensya at ng mga social workers ngayong panahon ng pandemic. In terms of structures, ano naman ang sitwasyon sa national level, sa city at barangay at organizations and agencies. Kumusta ang kanilang coordination tungkol sa child protection. Sa process of care, tiningnan ko yung service delivery mechanisms. Kumpleto pa ba? In place pa ba sa panahon ng pandemya? And then the continuum of protection, are there available preventive, promotive, responsive, rehabilitative programs and services sa panahon ng pandemya? Sa demand side, tinignan ko rin kung kumusta yung mga children and families. So we know already that they have a situation, no? Pero titignan pa rin because of the data gathering na ginawa ko, no? So ito ang conceptual framework that guided me in coming up with the findings or the data na kailangan makita. So ito na yung mga issues and challenges na nag-gather based on secondary and primary data from the survey. So when it comes to capacities, sa level ng agency, mayroon talagang temporary cessation of operations due to the lockdown. Yung mga ahensya, particularly child-focused agencies, nag-stop din sila, no? Hindi sila nag-work for some time. So ibig sabihin nun, marami implications yon. Makikita natin mamaya when it comes to child protection. Nagkaroon ng reallocation of manpower and financial resources. All of a sudden, merong need na i-adjust when it comes to the staff. Paano ngayon yung mga workload, mga ganyan, and yung mga resources, yung mga budget, i-re-realign yung mga budget, di ba? So merong nangyari mga ganon. Adjustment of policies and programs. So bawat action naman ng organization na pagbabago in relation to COVID-19 ay dapat masuportahan talaga ng policies and corresponding programs. Nagkaroon ng new normal work arrangements. Ito na yung very famous na work from home o kaya 2 to 3 times a week reporting and other modalities. No? New challenges in supervision ay nakita, no? Capacity building requirements for employees, medyo nagkaroon din ng need for a different type of capacity building. Need to intensify advocacy campaigns on child protection in view of risks of children. No? And then sa buhay, sa parte ng social workers, personal and family health and safety concerns. So meron ding concerns ang mga social workers sa kanilang personal at family at health, no? Kagaya din ng iba. Psychosocial issues, ito yung mga stresses, anxieties, and fears nila. May drastic change in socioeconomic situation and work arrangements, transition from face-to-face to virtual communication with clients, could not do personal visits to clients. Yan talaga yung hinaing ng mga social workers. Connectivity, technological issues and challenges, need for knowledge, skills, attitude enhancement due to the demands of COVID-19, and they could not easily document because of other concerns occupying their minds. So ito yung adverse effects or impact ng COVID sa capacities on child protection sa ahensya at saka sa mga social workers. Sa mga bata, classes were disrupted, no? Kasi when we do case management, we also need the cooperation of children and parents. That is why we need to look into their capacities also. Kaya ba nila na magresponde sa ating mga pangangailangan sa case management? Kagaya ng kapag tayo ba ay tumawag sa kanila or gusto nating magpag-usap sa kanila, are they readily available o baka marami silang mga concerns na inuuna kaysa sa ganon, no? Na disrupt yung mga classes nila, confused on the new learning modality. Not all basic needs are responded to, na-express talaga yan ng mga social workers and service providers na nakausap nila yung mga bata. Remained in the periphery, did not have much opportunity to be heard, confused, afraid, missing their classmates and school, ito nakita ko rin itong ganitong sa ibang studies, could not play outside their house, could not play outside their house, but kasi most of them have small houses at limited ang space, no? Di na nga sila makapaglaro sa labas, di pa sila makapaglaro sa loob. At risk of abuse, so alam na natin yan, limited access to technology and information, limited awareness and capacity to protect themselves. Yan yung mga bata, no? When it comes to families, yun, nabanggit na natin yung loss of jobs, walang opportunity for alternative livelihood. Mahirap kumilos talaga, no, sa panahon ng pandemya, yung mga psychosocial problems, suffered from long queues, exposure to health risks due to the unsystematic distribution of relief assistance. So nakadagdag, hindi ibig sabihin may policy tayo to respond to COVID ay nakakatulong na ng lubusan, no? Meron ding mga negative effects, yung pagpipila nila at yung matagal na exposure nila sa ibang tao na naman, no? Habang pumipila sa SAP. Limited awareness and capacity to protect children during the pandemic. So yan ang sa level ng capacity sa parents and children. When it comes to the structure, sa national level, may limited crisis communication protocols and mechanisms tayo. Nagulat tayo sa pagdating ng pandemya, hindi na-ensure ng ating gobyerno ang tamang information and communication sa lahat ng antas ng pamamahala, no? Nakita natin yon, maraming mga nasusulat at maraming mga videos, articles, and also directly from the people kung ano yung naging epekto ng COVID na hindi masyado pang na-manage ng ating national government. Napapaba, magkakascade dapat sa mga local governments. Lack of synchronization of government programs related to COVID-19. So we are a witness to that, no? Social workers, families, communities, na-witness natin na dahil nga crisis situation siya, para bang yung mga ahensya ng gobyerno sa national level, particularly kasi sila yung nakikita natin, no, na nag-ooperate, minsan may mga trabaho na hindi na co-coordinate at hindi na synchronize. So yun ang nakikita natin na limitation ng structures natin, no? Sa city level, policy issuance and guidance not prompt, especially on protecting children. May mga nakapagsabi pa nga na yung mga ibang barangay captains, may kasama pang yung sulat nila sa mga tao na dumating, halimbawa ng late na, no, after 1 week or 2 weeks, kasama ng ayuda na late din, ay sinasamahan pa ulit ng mga calling cards ng mga barangay captains. So may pamumulitika pa rin, no? Sa barangay level, local structures protecting children not fully operational, disrupted referral mechanisms, online mechanisms not readily available, challenges in information dissemination, nagtatanungan ng mga tao, hindi nila alam kung anong mangyayari, delayed advice on the distribution of relief goods, totoo yan sa halos lahat ng mga cities dito sa NCR na affected, no? Issues on corruption, sale of quarantine pass, manipulation of the special assistance program. We already know that, na babalitaan natin. Sa ibang organizations, it took time before organizations were able to resume operations, thereby affecting the system of coordination, referrals, and service delivery. Definitely, na-weaken ang structures ngayong panahon ng pandemya, yung structures on child protection. When it comes to process of care, the limitations of the structures had a corresponding effect on the child protection service delivery system. Social workers could not immediately refer and follow up cases and facilitate aftercare. It took time before bumalik sa kanilang normal operations yung mga agencies, so hindi possible na mag-refer. Just imagine yung mga nabinbin na mga kaso, halimbawa ng mga children in conflict with the law, yung mga abuse cases, na hindi na muna natuloy, yung naantala ang mga direct services, halimbawa provision of psychosocial support, yung mga psychological, medical services, naantala lahat yan, no? So yung process of care definitely affected. Sa continuum of care naman, services are more on direct assistance to children and families, no? Nag-focus tayo sa mga ayuda kasi nga walang makain. Yung mga medicines, no? Yan ang importante sa panahon ng crisis. So yung mga preventive, rehabilitative, they took a backseat, no? Center-based interventions were mostly on the home life aspect. Because social workers and other center workers, hindi naman muna sila makapasok. So, home life muna, no? Yung i-maintain lang yung buhay sa loob ng center. Yung sudden suspension of classes has put a stop also on social workers monitoring of the education of children, excuse me, for a while. No? So alam na natin yan. Some programs stopped due to the lack of funds in view of disrupted fundraising activities. Tama yan. No? Development and face-to-face child rights advocacy activities were not implemented because of the restrictions on mass gatherings, and case managers could not easily refer cases, kagaya na nabanggit ko kanina. So yun, continuum of care affected na affected din. Now, so those are the issues, pero meron din naman, siyempre magpo-cope ang lahat, no? So merong emerging trends na note doon sa pagda-data gathering ko, no? So ito na yung naging coping uh, coping means of coping ng ahensya, no? Nagkaroon ng na-retain naman nila yung case management systems despite the pandemic. Nag-adapt sila ng virtual mechanisms in communicating with clients and conducting work-related meetings, formal registration in online or virtual meeting platforms or carpooling. So, yung mga organizations kinailangan nilang mag-register na sa mga Zoom and other platforms para patuloy yung communication with clients and partners, no? Formal, adopted more relaxed work arrangements. So nag-work from home ang mga organizations, more active utilization of emails and chat mechanisms with the staff, and modification of financial systems. Some organizations have converted their financial processes into electronic na means na. Hindi na yung mga manual, yung iba, no? Nag-cook kaagad sila. Ang mga social workers, merong self-enrichment, the staff found ways to strengthen their skills. Ang sabi nga ng isa sa mga na-survey, no, sumagot sa survey, we bring out our very best as social workers in the online skill of interviewing. So, nakaka-develop na sila ng mga online skills in interviewing. Diba? Facilitating virtual meetings with clients and client groups using Facebook Messenger, Zoom, Google Meet, and text. No? Strategize and became more resourceful and practice self-care. They talked with their fellow implementers and case managers to express their emotions, challenges, and issues. So, merong mga emerging trends na nakatulong talaga sa pag-cope ng mga social workers and agencies. When it comes to children, nakapag-explore din ng mga bata on the use of technology for online activities with the social workers. They found alternative home-based activities such as TikTok, chatting, and with friends online. So ito yung mga nagamit nila para maibsan yung kanilang levels of stress. No? Families, bayanihan spirit practice in neighborhoods and communities, maski manually, virtually in some areas, explore the use of technology. So mga parents, na-explore na rin nila ang use ng technology, particularly social media. Leadership capacities developed by participating in online activities with social workers. So yun yung mga nakita sa capacities na forms of coping ng apat na sectors na yon, no? So when it comes to structures, ito yung nakitang adjustments, coordination conducted through social media, establishment of online case management systems, more stakeholders are able to attend virtual meetings. Ito yung natutuwa sila, some organization members na they don't have to go through traffics, no, in order to attend meetings at walang risk na malilate sila. Although some would be late pa rin kasi maski online, malilate ka pa rin kung meron din mga factors na naka-apekto sa'yo, no? Structures are slowly exploring ways to collaborate, do referrals, follow-up, and coordination remotely. So the name of the game is really technology-based, remote mechanisms, virtual mechanisms, online. In lieu of the face-to-face na hindi bawal na nga, no? When it comes to process of care, ang nangyari, yung coordination, follow-up, and referrals, eventually became easier and facilitative according to them, no, yung mga respondents, because of the virtual system. So madali na lang mag-coordinate through, halimbawa, nag-Zoom kayo, nag-chat kayo, so madali coordinate. Release of funds for assistance done via bank transfers instead of asking clients to go to the agencies, which is beneficial to the clients and even for social workers. So yan ang mga ikinagaan ng process of care. Ito yung mga trends, no? Sa continuum of protection, dun sa services, na-intensify yung advocacy campaigns through the development and dissemination of information education campaign materials through the social media. So, dumami ang mga campaign materials in order to protect children. Conceptualization of the creation of an online platform for the protection of children where children and parents can interact with service providers. So this is particularly true with the National Council of Social Development, which came up with an online child protection mechanism kung saan pwede sila makipag-interact with, mga social workers can interact with children and families if they need psychosocial support in view of the so many problems they are facing. At lalo na yung mga bata sa kanilang mga modular education activities, no? So those are the issues and the corresponding trends, no? So tingnan natin kung ano yung implikasyon ngayon ng mga ito sa policy, no? Or ano yung mga implications na nagni-need ng nagwa-warrant ng policy responses. So tingnan natin, no? From the micro to macro levels, there are corresponding issues and challenges in child protection that social workers need to consider in their case management when it comes to assessment and interventions. So ito general implications ko, no? COVID-19 is considered a disaster. Preparedness and mitigation measures need to be taken into consideration and people need to be aware and capacitated. So again, it warrants an effective community organizing kasi dapat ang mga tao maging aware collectively and sana makapag-respond sila through preparedness, no? Hindi na pwedeng mag-prepare ngayon kasi nandiyan na ang crisis, pero ugaliin na sana nila. This should come as a lesson, no? Doon sa mga communities na walang preparedness when it comes to mitigating the impact of calamities or health crisis kagaya nito, no? Public health crisis. Children must be protected by the duty bearer of rights, but they can also be capacitated to protect themselves. So ang isang implikasyon, hindi na lamang dapat ang mga bata ay nananatiling beneficiaries of services, they can also be protected based on their evolving capacities and corresponding age, no? They can also protect themselves. Hindi na lang sila yung pinoprotektan. Pwedeng two-pronged yan, no? So yung nature of policy adjustments needed to adapt to the demands of the pandemic, ito na yung mga implication sa policy. Both supply and demand sides need to be supported with policy adjustments towards a technology-based child protection case management system. So ang panawagan na ngayon, ang pinaka-implikasyon talaga, mag-shift ang lahat sa technology-based child protection case management system, no? Lalo na ngayon na nananatili pa rin ang crisis ng public health na yan sa atin. Ano ang implikasyon to social workers? Social workers have their own psychosocial problems relative to the pandemic, and this has to be taken as an equity issue. So hindi lamang in relation to beneficiaries na meron tayong equity issue, meron ding equity issue ang mga social workers. Kailangan ding tignan kung sila ba ay safe, sila ba ay meron din bang certain response sa kanilang mga pangangailangan sa ngayon, no? Merong similar weight itong equity issue na to the equity issues involving the clients due to the nature of the crisis, putting each and everyone on a certain level of health risks and vulnerabilities. Tayong lahat, social worker ka man, bata ka man, and other members of the family, pare-pareho tayo ng health risk. Lalong-lalo na yung mga may existing na sakit, no? Social workers need to modify their skills in communicating, interviewing, resource mobilization, advocacy, and a wide array of roles through online mechanisms. So kailangan nakakaiba na namang capacity building ang mga social workers in order to adapt to the changes and to the requirements of the new normal. There is a need to assess the social workers' workload, work arrangements, and case management challenges posed by the new normal. So tingnan din natin yung kapakanan ng mga social workers. Marami ding implikasyon ang COVID-19 sa kanila. Implications to clients in relation to case management, the socioeconomic and psychosocial impact of the pandemic on children and families pose a great challenge to client participation in case management. Yung nabanggit ko kanina na maraming concerns ang mga kliyente na hindi nila siguro mabigyan ng pansin na yung mga developmental activities na nakaplano doon sa grupo ng mga service delivery mechanisms ng mga organizations. No? So tingnan din natin yung implikasyon sa kanila para hindi natin sila todo-todong i-require na mag-respond sa case management. Bagkus, i-respond din natin ang mga needs nila for capacity building in order to be able to cope with the demands of the new normal para makapag-cooperate din sila sa case management process. Children and parents could evolve as community partners and not mere beneficiaries of services. A sense of volunteerism has been sparked by the pandemic due to the bayanihan spirit promoted by the government. People's leadership capacities are being developed because of the need to respond to their situation on their own individually as families and as a community. So in short, nag-evolve at may potential ang mga tao sa komunidad na maging partner sa development, no? Kasi makakapag-develop sila ng kakaibang mga capacities ngayong panahon ng pandemic na hindi na lang sila beneficiaries, pwede sila maging kasama sa mga gagawin, no? In order to resolve the problems and issues brought about by the pandemic. Ang implikasyon naman sa agency, policy, no? There's a need to embrace technological changes brought about by the pandemic as a new trend in case management, which opens possibilities for the marginalized sectors to have technology as part of household assets and social provision. Mag-iiba na talaga yung policies din ng mag-iiba or mamomodify ng mga organizations, no? Mag-shift sila sa technology-based modalities. Pati yung mga beneficiaries, isa sa mga pwedeng i-assist sa kanila ay technology, services na on technology. So hindi na lang yung mga financial assistance, material assistance, kundi assistance in relation to technology, no? Yung pag-acquire nila ng mga gadgets, halimbawa, and other communication platforms or mechanisms. Organizations may need to integrate information and technology in their policies and programs and as targets and indicators in their monitoring and evaluation systems. New forms of direct assistance, so ito yung nabanggit ko kanina na merong magkakaroon ng bagong forma ng direct assistance to children, families, na pwede nang ma-include ngayon ang provision ng gadgets. Diba? Halimbawa, nagpo-provide tayo ng school supplies, uniforms, sa mga bata noong wala pang pandemya. Ngayon, pwede na madagdagan or ma-replace ng mga gadgets, financial support for internet connection, reproduction of modules for online learning, in lieu of the usual school supplies and uniforms books na hindi naman na kailangan siguro ngayon kasi puro nga electronic and online na. No? So merong mga policies na dapat ma-adjust sa level ng organization. At sa staff supervision, binibigyan ko ng diin ang staff supervision because when it comes to case management, there should be a constant or consistent supervision ng mga staff while performing their tasks in case management. Kasi nagpo-provide ng guidance, administrative, educational, and support ang mga supervisors. Agencies and supervisors need to take into consideration the evolving landscape of client-worker relationship and the helping process in the context of COVID-19 and provide the necessary support, guidance, teaching, mentoring, and coaching to social workers in their case management functions. So isa sa mga implications yan, dapat magkaroon ng adjustment ang supervision. So yan yung mga implications, no? Given those issues, trends, implications, isa-sum up ko lahat yun into a proposal for a technology-based child protection case management. Kumbaga, mag-a-adjust tayo ngayon sa panahon ng pandemya, hindi natin mahihintay na bumalik tayo sa sinasabi nating normal. There is a new normal. So there is a need to come up with a new modality in managing cases or in delivering services to the client amidst the pandemic. No? So this, going back to the conceptual framework I presented earlier, this is now the proposed technology-based child protection case management framework, wherein makikita natin na doon sa mga different components, sa supply side, merong adjustments dapat na mangyayari. Hindi na pwede yung dati, no? At sa demand side, dapat din merong kaukulang assistance na ibibigay sa mga pamilya at mga bata, no? When it comes to still continuing protecting children sa panahon ng pandemic. Sa level ng capacities, ito yung recommendations, kumbaga, na adjustment. Integration of COVID-19 and technology-related concerns in the agency policies, dapat mangyari yan. Social workers are supervised, assisted, capacitated, and compensated based on new normal requirements. Dapat tingnan ang kapakanan ng social workers. Mas dadagdagan ba natin sila ng hazard pay, mga ganon, no? So there's a need to look into that. Tapos at the same time, organizations should be assisted also. Kung halimbawa, ang government natin, they can support NGOs na wala ng funds because of COVID-19, no? Nag-stop ang funding, nag-iba ang focus ng mga funders because of that. So affected yung kanilang mga services. So perhaps the government, in order that capacities will be retained, no, para patuloy na makapagsagawa ng child protection services or makapag-deliver ang mga organizations, dapat masuportahan din sila. So both organizations and social workers must be supported. At doon sa mga organizations kung saan nagtatrabaho ang mga social workers, they should consider looking into the welfare of social workers sa panahon ng new normal. When it comes to structures, merong dapat coordination, referrals, follow-ups, na remote na ang mga mechanisms using interagency and interdisciplinary approaches. Kung dati, ang mga structures, nagmi-meeting sila face-to-face to talk about progress in their plans, about child protection, lalo na naka-anchor doon sa mga government-initiated policies and programs natin, no, or plans, consider having remote mechanisms na in coordinating and working together. No? Sa process of care, meron na dapat online and technology-based service delivery mechanisms na platforms and referral pathways. So, hindi enough na tatawag ka na lang sa phone, so baka pwede nang gamitin ng mga social media. I know that several organizations are doing that. Inilagay ko lang dito in order to set the proposal straight, no? Ayan, so meron dapat or technology-based. Technology-based, ibig sabihin lahat ng klase ng technology pwedeng magamit. No, it's not only the internet, internet-based technology, pero pwede rin naman yung mga cellphones na not necessarily online ang kanilang pwedeng magawa. No? When it comes to the continuum of protection, there should be an online technology-based preventive, promotive, responsive, rehabilitative, child protective note. We can only sustain changes kapag supported ng policy. Kung walang policy support yan, administrative policy ng mga organizations, ay hindi magtatagal ang mga pagbabago sa mga mechanisms ngayong panahon ng pandemic, no, on child protection. So gusto ko lang i-highlight or i-emphasize na importante pa rin na ipa-medical check-up ang bata, halimbawa na naabuso, as a matter of protocol, no, yung psychological evaluation, yung mga services na yung psychological and medical services, mas maganda kung face-to-face. Pero kung hindi, so pwede namang online, pero as much as possible, ganun, kung pag-safe na yun. Kailangan makita yung physical bodies ng mga naabuso, kung merong mga sexual or physical abuse na nangyayari. Okay? So ito, yung supply side, yung supply factors, very important na mag-based mechanisms ang nakapropose. So, nakalagay lang yung mga specific actions na pwedeng gawin in relation to the components para maging effective pa rin at in place at consistent na nai-implement ang child protection. No? Sa demand side, children and families assist based platforms effectively and participate actively in child protection. Material assistance to them should include technology-based materials, could become community partners and leaders. No? So ito yung mga pwedeng gawin in relation to kapag nagawa ito, ma-ensure natin na maski meron tayong pandemya, children are continuously protected at na ibibigay natin lahat ng mga pangangailangan nila. No? So, ito yung ending ng aking presentation, yung konkretong hakbang na pwedeng gawin ng mga structures, ang ating mga government and non-government organizations in order to ensure continuous child protection system implementation among organizations as a whole. No? So this ends my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and I hope nandyan pa kayo lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Professor Pasos, for giving us an overview and context of social work case management and how the social workers' activities were impacted by the pandemic. Well, connectivity issue is one of the big challenges in case management, and we just experienced it today. Hope that our connection gets better. The next speaker is the head of the aftercare and national aftercare training of the International Justice Mission Philippines. She is also currently a board member of PASWI Cebu chapter. To discuss challenges and solutions in case management of OSEC during the pandemic, may I present to you Dr. Clara Nemia C. Antepala.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share the experience of IJM in case management of OSEC during the pandemic. So I am the head of the aftercare and national aftercare training of the IJM, and you know that IJM is focusing on OSEC. So I have been tasked to talk about the challenges and solutions in case management of OSEC during the COVID pandemic. So this is really focused on the COVID pandemic. And the previous speaker already discussed a lot about those challenges. But let me just bring your attention to some of the facts about the Philippines being a global epicenter. This is something that I think many of us should be aware of. Right now, OSEC is considered as one of the rampant and evolving threats in the Philippines. And according to Europol, or the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, the Philippines remains the top country where the abuse takes place, where OSEC takes place. And this is mainly because of the following reasons. One, this was mentioned earlier on by the previous speaker, we have high internet connectivity. Second, well, there is the availability of relatively cheap smartphones and tablets. There is also widespread use of the English language. I really did not think ever that what once was a positive characteristics of Filipinos, the facility of the English language, is now a negative thing. And another reason is that there is a high number of relatively poor families in the Philippines. And so they engage in OSEC. That is not an excuse, but they're doing it because they say they are poor. And then we have the perception that of the community that do not see live streaming of child sexual abuse as being in conflict with social norms. Nag-ano lang yan, naghahanap lang ng hanap buhay yan, and so on and so forth, which is really crazy if you think about the fact that they are selling their own kids for money. And so that was before COVID-19. And nothing could have prepared us for this pandemic. So COVID-19 surprised the world because of its viciousness and its impact on global society. We already know that right now. COVID-19 has brought the world to its knees. And so this pandemic gave rise to some, unusual challenges impacting the environmental and socioeconomic landscape of the Philippines. So as the world struggles against COVID-19 pandemic, many Filipino children are experiencing experiencing a silent and secret pandemic. And we call it, there's a name for this, and this is online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC. Now, because OSEC is a silent and secret pandemic, much attention is needed to unpack the burden of providing interventions and services to those who are affected by this pandemic. I mean, that was the previous speaker already unpacked what case management was all about. But let us unpack it some more as applied to OSEC. Okay. So how do we unpack case management in the face of challenges brought about by the pandemic? Okay. So before the pandemic, when OSEC victims get rescued, the system, before pandemic, the system that they're brought into has already been confusing and potentially re-traumatizing. For example, being removed from their homes and brought to an unfamiliar place. That is traumatizing. And being interviewed by unfamiliar people. There's so many people who interview them, from the police or social workers, etc., etc. And then not knowing when they can go home or whether they can finish schooling. Those are things that can be potentially re-traumatizing for these children. All these things are experienced by victims as a series of disconnected processes that feel disjointed and can seem overwhelming. So the question needs to be asked, why is it that a helping process envisioned to solve problems could be potentially re-traumatizing for survivors? Okay, so let's look at some realities. Well, let us accept the fact that in our profession, we are often asked to do more with less. The pandemic has wreaked havoc not only on the health system, but also caused widespread hunger, as mentioned by the previous speaker, and poverty among a vast number of the population. Even before the pandemic, we already suffered from, we didn't have enough budget, we didn't have enough staff, we didn't have enough time to do all the things that we were supposed to do, like assessments, like intervention planning, like case conferences, like home visits. We didn't have enough hands and feet to do all these things. And so we are seeing a reality that there will always be limitless needs of our clients, but we have very limited resources, and resources could mean staffing, budget, time, facilities, and so on and so forth. The challenge really is, how do we do all these things in the face of this pandemic? And if we throw into that equation the widespread hunger and poverty because of what the pandemic has done in our country, then you have an explosion of unmet needs of those you're expected to help. Okay, so having said that, before I proceed to the challenges, let me just present you some facts on OSEC. First of all, we all know that OSEC is the live streamed sexual abuse of children. And let me just emphasize this. It's not just posing naked. It's not just posing online. OSEC is the live streamed sexual abuse of children. So while the child is being sexually abused, it is live streamed for the consumption of pedophiles in other parts of the world who are able to pay the local perpetrator. Second, family members are mostly involved in OSEC cases, meaning the perpetrators are mostly family members. In a recently launched IJM OSEC research study, OSEC was found to be usually family-based crime. And the perpetrators, in as far as our research was concerned, 41% were biological parents, and 42% were other close family members. So an aunt, a grandmother, and so on, a cousin, and so on and so forth. Third, because OSEC is a family-based crime, the victims are usually sibling groups. So we are not seeing individual children being abused, just like trafficking. We are seeing sibling groups because the abuse happens in a family. And so there are many cases that we found that all of the siblings are being sold online, being abused online. Unfortunately, the siblings are not just victims themselves. They also perpetrate against each other. What do I mean by that? They abuse each other because it is requested by the pedophile who is paying for the live show. So the pedophile might say, I want you to do this and do that to your sister or to your brother. So it's not just sexual abuse on the children themselves are perpetrating against themselves or committing sexual abuses against themselves. Fourth, unlike victims of traditional trafficking, OSEC victims are very young. They belong, in many of our cases in IJM, most of our cases are below 12 years old. You can just imagine. And the youngest we have on record was below 1 year old. In fact, on record, we have a 2-month-old baby who was offered for sexual abuse online. Lastly, there is a continual risk of re-traumatization because once abuse videos are uploaded and live streamed, they remain available for viewing by as many people were able to access the live streaming. So even if the victim herself deleted that video, if there were many people who viewed it and downloaded it and viewed it, that picture will remain online forever. And even if a victim has been healed and restored, there's really no knowing when that picture will pop up. Maybe in the Facebook of her office mate or of her classmate. So it's that continual risk of re-traumatization is there. Sorry. Okay, so given all these things, what then are the challenges in providing care to OSEC survivors? So I will be focusing on the challenges for OSEC survivors. Because of these realities, case management of OSEC is not and should not be the monopoly of social workers alone. It is a shared responsibility among law enforcement officers, social workers, doctors, mental health professionals, teachers, government, non-government, church, academia, etc. Everyone who gets into contact with OSEC cases. And because OSEC requires multidisciplinary approaches, it is imperative that we are able to streamline and coordinate case management processes. Otherwise, it can become overwhelming and confusing for our clients. But before I go directly into the challenges, let me just present to you what are the primary needs then of OSEC survivors, because we cannot know the specific challenges if we do not know what they need in the first place. So this slide will show us what the primary needs. There are many other needs, but I'm just presenting to you what the primary needs are. First of all, they need safe, trauma-informed placement options immediately after rescue. It can be a shelter, it can be a processing center, it can be an assessment center, but it has to be safe and trauma-informed, not a police station where all the, thugs and my goodness. So it is somewhere else that is safe and trauma informed. It can be a child protection unit of a hospital, but definitely not a place where the abuser can have access or other perpetrators and other public can see them. The next need of the OSEC survivor is structure and return to normalcy. What do I mean by structure and return to normalcy? Structure means, what are they used to doing? Are they used to waking up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock? Are they used to eating breakfast at 7 and so on and so forth? So wherever they are brought to, whether it's a shelter, whether it's a CPU or it's an assessment center, social workers and house parents have to exert effort to at least make sure that the routines in the facility mimic or at least copy what the child is used to. It is very traumatizing for a child to be placed in a shelter and suddenly he is or she is made to wake up at 4 because they need to wash clothes and etc. etc. That is something that can add to the trauma of the child. So structure and return to normalcy. If they're attending school, then as much as possible and the soonest possible time, they should be attending school, whether it is within the shelter or some other arrangements. Our experience in IJM is that our teachers bring the modules to the safe shelter and the children are helped to learn the modules by the house parents. The next need is a strong trauma services. We know that being removed from the home is very traumatizing for a child. So we need to have a strong assessment of trauma symptoms and strong provision of therapeutic services for these children, wherever they are. Then we also need to look at long-term care options. Long-term care options is a little bit problematic in the Philippines because we lack these facilities. And we all know that our children are not safe to be returned home. So we really need to look at long-term care options. And if they are not there right now, then part of the duty and responsibility of the social worker is to advocate that these shelters are available. The last need, primary need of the survivor is reconciliation and healing. We have seen that majority of the abuses are committed by the parents. And when you have a parent abusing you, the impact of that abuse can be really painful. It can even destroy you. So IJMs, we have our own consultant, si Dr. Gigi Harner. She conceptualized a program that would provide an opportunity for reconciliation and healing, but only if warranted by assessment. But we found that many mothers who abuse their children want to ask forgiveness from their children, and children want to forgive their parents. We all know, I think, we've heard that when children are abused, they do not hate their parents, they hate themselves. And so we need to create an opportunity where there is reconciliation. Of course, the crime has to be paid for with a penalty, and the shortest number of years that our perpetrators are suffering from is 15 years. That's a minimum sentence. But there has to be reconciliation and healing. And we've seen how effective this is in helping our children get closure from their abuse. So, having said that, what are the common, and now I'm talking about uncommon challenges in providing care to us. We have talked about the common challenges before the pandemic. Now I'm presenting to you what are the uncommon challenges that our social workers, both in IJM and our partners in the LGU or in the SWD, have faced because of this pandemic. So you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 challenges that I picked out as the most common challenges that we have seen and experienced. First of all, the first rung in the ladder is demographically diverse. What do I mean by that? Most of our clients in age, in sex, in education are very diverse. As I mentioned, in terms of age, we have as young as 2 months old and as old as over 20 years old. Imagine that. So if you're talking about interventions, you have to think about interventions for infants and adults, for that matter. Then we are seeing an increasing number of males and LGBTQ in our cases. We have schooled and unschooled, we have Catholics, and so on and so forth. Now, let me bring you back to the demographics of it. The challenge here is we have infants, but we don't have enough foster parents. We have LGBTQ, we don't have facilities for LGBTQ. We have increasing number of males, but most of our facilities are for females. So that is the challenge. And then we go to the geographically scattered. In IJM's work, we are catering to OSIC survivors from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Imagine that. And IJM is based only in Manila and in Luzon. So that I'll tell you later on how we are coping with that. And then we have OSIC survivors in the urban jungles, like in squatter areas in cities. And then we have clients living in the middle of rice paddies in Luzon and in Mindanao. So you can just imagine how difficult it is to provide case management to a very geographically scattered clientele. And that brings me to the next challenge, which is about mobility and travel restrictions. If before the pandemic, it was already difficult to travel and go, do home visits, organize case conferences with partners in Mindanao, in Luzon, and in different provinces in these places, you can just imagine how difficult it is right now with mobility and travel restrictions. In IJM, we're not allowed to travel. There are many restrictions. So how can you provide? How can you do home visits? How can you, and so on and so forth. I will discuss later on what we have done so far to cope with this. And then that brings me to the next challenge, which is widespread socioeconomic upheaval. I'm not going to discuss this in detail because this has already been discussed by the previous speaker. The pandemic has caused loss of jobs and loss of livelihood, period. And that is creating a lot of hunger and poverty in our clientele. And lastly, we have the challenge of unprecedented access to children. Why? Because children are now being quarantined at home together with the potential abuser, is the mother, the auntie, or the cousin. And then we have pedophiles who are also quarantined back in their countries. And so both sides have exactly the same situation right now, a lot of time in front of the internet or using the internet. And that is something that spells a disaster for children. And so the previous speaker has talked in detail about that. So the lockdown definitely and the quarantine is not good. And CPN has shown that there were increasing reports of OSEC during the lockdown. Okay. Now, what were our studies? So I'm talking about IJM and our partners who are in the government and who are in the NGOs, shelters, disability social workers, LGUs, and so on and so forth. IJM has come up with these strategies to cope with the limitations and the challenges of the pandemic. And it's really turned our world upside down. But one of our strategies, which is offsite support and consultations with our government, law enforcement, social workers, prosecutors, etc., has definitely continued even with the lockdown. And so consultations like, how do I assess trauma? How do I assess the needs of this client? How do I assess risks? How do I make a decision whether to return this child or to place this child in a residential care? So our offsite support can be as simple as sharing tools, intake sheets, assessment of needs, assessment of trauma, and then we provide coaching and mentoring over the internet. And we also, our lawyers, our investigators, we provide support as well for the other members of the multidisciplinary team. And so this is something that we have found to be really effective within the pandemic situation. Another strategy is that we have preserved and we have strengthened our alliances with non-government organizations, philanthropic foundations, churches, and other stakeholders. IJM is limited because of travel restrictions, but we have partners who are there in the ground where our clients are. So we have maintained strong alliances with churches who are there in the barangay or in the municipality. We have maintained alliances with foundations who are able to provide care packages like Rafi or like Consuelo Foundation. Thank you very much. And so these alliances have helped us multiply ourselves within the limits of this pandemic. And the last strategy is the sharing of resources with government and non-government partners. So within the limits of our capacity, we shared like simple things like we shared PPEs with our law enforcement partners and our frontliner social workers. We provided hand sanitizers and alcohol to our shelters and so on and so forth. And we praise God for allowing us to do that. So these are the strategies that we have been able to use within the pandemic. But what exactly are the social workers doing in terms of providing direct case management to our clients? So these are the things that we have been able to do within the limits of the lockdowns and the quarantine. So first, our social workers were able to do weekly phone check-ins and follow-up of survivors, at least those who have cell phones or those who are connected through the internet. If not, we conduct weekly phone-ins with our LGU partners who are there, or our partners, church partners who are there. So we use all means to be able to reach out to our clients. Second, we also provided financial assistance to our clients and their families. As we said earlier on, there's like widespread hunger and poverty going on. And the least we could do is to answer their basic needs because, well, according to Maslow, etc., etc. So yeah, so we provided that through money remittance outlets. And then we also provided medical assistance and mental health services in collaboration with, as I said, we multiply ourselves with alliances with our partners down there who are in the ground so that they are the ones who provide the mental health in collaboration with LGUs, NGOs, and church partners. If they don't know how, then IJM provides technical assistance and coaching and mentoring about how to do this so that they will be the one to deliver that service to our clients. And then lastly, we conducted virtual collaborative case conferences. Now we are really good at doing this. Without the pandemic, I don't think we will be as good at using Zoom or Google Meet or WhatsApp, etc., etc. But we have successfully connected with our partners and our clients and organized virtual case conferences through all these media. So praise God for technology, we were able to do that. So having said that, what were the lessons that we've learned in IJM and in working with our partners? What were the lessons that we've learned? One, as you can see on top, we've learned that there is no single agency that has all the resources to respond to the needs of OSEC. And even not OSEC alone, all clients. There is no single agency. Police cannot do this alone. DSWD cannot do this alone. The LGU, much more, cannot do this alone. So we've learned that. So in order for us to provide effective response to OSEC and other clients as well during the COVID, our processes should be taken as one coherent process. And what do I mean by that? The previous speaker mentioned this already. We have to start with assessments. And then we go to planning the interventions. And then we go to the implementation of the intervention and evaluation and so on and so forth. We cannot have a rescue operation of OSEC and then return the child, reintegrate the child without proper assessments. That's what I mean. The process should be one coherent process. But the problem with us is because of limited facilities and limited resources, sometimes we jump and we cut the processes because there's just no way we can provide that service. But my goodness, we are not alone in this fight. If you don't have the resources, you can just very easily call someone, call a friend, call an NGO, call a church, call DSWD, call PNP for security, and so on and so forth. We are not in this fight alone. We are a team. But whether you are in a well-organized team, in a well-equipped facility, or whether you are alone in a fourth-class municipality, we have to learn to work together. We have a network of service providers who may be in your area, you just don't know how. So one of our plans is to help our LGUs create that network of care so that we will achieve the outcomes that we want for our clients. And speaking of outcomes, this is my last slide. Speaking of outcomes, the previous speaker talked about gender-based, rights-based, etc., etc. IJM talks about outcomes-based case management, because if we do not have in our sight what the outcomes are that we want to achieve in providing case management to OSEC, then we will get lost along the way. So for IJM, these are our desired outcomes, and these are the measures. We measure how well we have been able to protect the child or provide, not we, but the team, including LGU, DSWD, police, church, academe. It's not just IJM. IJM works with everyone to provide all these desired outcomes. Have we provided appropriate education and economic empowerment so that they will not be vulnerable again? Have we provided health and physical well-being to our clients? Have we provided mental well-being? Have we provided support system? Because if the client is abused in the family, there has to be another set of people who can provide support to them if they are being returned to the community. And of course, justice and legal support. These are the outcomes that we measure our case management efforts on. Our intervention plans, our assessments, our intervention plans, our monitoring are all geared towards achieving these outcomes. And based on our experience, there are only three simple principles or practices that IJM considered as effective in achieving these desired outcomes. And I call it the 3 C's. First, we have communication. We have to communicate with each other. If we lack something, reach out, because there might be someone else who has the ability to help you or the facility. We have to coordinate. If we do not coordinate, one person will interview, another person will, why don't we share? Why don't we share information? We have to coordinate so that we do not re-traumatize our clients. We have to coordinate our services so that we don't miss anyone. So, because if you don't coordinate, maybe one area have been given like several times of care packages, but some other area has not been given that. So we need to coordinate our efforts. And of course, collaboration. How do we collaborate? We all have our own protocols. The DOJ, as mentioned by the previous speaker, the DOJ came up with the CSPC case management protocol. So we have this one unifying protocol within our hands. But how many of us has read the CSPC case management protocol? But okay, so I think before you go and grab the next copy of the CSPC case management protocol, let me just tell you, the CSPC case management protocol was issued in 2013. And in 2013, we did not understand OSEC yet. So if you read the CSPC case management protocol, you'll see there that there are nuances in OSEC that are not included there. So hopefully this presentation has shed light on some of those nuances that you cannot find in the CSPC case management protocol. And if you have questions, you can very easily reach IJM. We are on Facebook. We have our contact numbers there. We can share with you specific information about OSEC that we have learned through our casework experience. Thank you very much. That's all. And if you have questions, you can type your questions in the chat box. And if you don't have time, we will make sure that we will answer your questions through Facebook or through other means, through email, and so on and so forth. So, daghang salamat, and I hope you learned from the experience of IJM in providing case management of OSEC during the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nemia, for that very comprehensive and informative presentation. It's already 11:22 and we still have one more speaker to discuss with us, PGH CPU Social Workers Case Management, Challenges, Innovations, and Best Practices. May I introduce to you the Supervising Social Worker, Social Work Services of the PGH Child Protection Unit, Ms. Annalisa R. Macababad.
Sit, 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 alibambang, sa lagito at sa lagutuang, ang babae sa lansangan.
Good morning, everyone. My task today in this webinar is primarily to discuss the challenges that the PGH CPU and social workers have encountered in the management of child abuse cases during this time of pandemic, and share some innovations that are adopted in the new normal delivery of services. Let me share a case with you that was recently referred to the unit. This will also serve as a reference as I go through this presentation. Carla is a 17-year-old female who was brought to CPU for medical examination. She was referred by the public attorney's office and accompanied by her 20-year-old partner. The patient has been living with her partner since the start of MECQ. Carla approached the public attorney's office to file a complaint against her biological father and her stepmother for sexual abuse. The sexual abuse happened more than 3 years ago and lasted 1 month. The sexual acts involved her stepmother, and photos and videos were taken. Her father threatened her that the photos and videos will be released and that she will be killed if she told anyone. She was also not permitted to go out and was verbally abused. After 1 month, Carla transferred to her maternal aunt's house since her father was not supporting her education. She lived with her maternal aunt for 3 years, but felt that the family saw her as a burden. She finally disclosed when they kept asking why her father never visited her. They did not believe her, saying, "Bakit ngayon ka lang nagsabi?" And they also blamed her, saying, "Baka ginusto mo dahil dun sa nangyari." She asked her maternal aunt's permission to leave, and she was told to go away. She decided to stay with her girlfriend's family, who welcomed her and provided support. Carla is the only child born out of a common law relationship that lasted 2 years. She was raised by her mother and stepfather. Growing up, she was expected to excel in class and was hit for misbehaving. She was 14 years old when her stepfather began hitting her more severely and frequently. He also started sexually abusing her. She ran away and asked for a classmate's help to call her biological father. Her father invited her to live with him and sent money for transportation. Her mother found out about the abuse and pleaded with her to stay, but she decided to go to her father. At the CPU, Carla disclosed that she started attempting suicide in her maternal aunt's house 3 years ago. She thinks of suicide every other month and hits herself when she has negative thoughts. She is always alone and quiet. She has a very good relationship with her partner and her family. She no longer trusts any of her relatives. So, what are the issues and challenges that we social workers have in this case? And what was done to protect Carla from further harm? There is a threat to Carla's life because she is suicidal, and the family that she came from is very dysfunctional and abusive. She needs emergency referral to a psychiatrist, and normally this warrants protective custody to a shelter because there seems to have no relatives who can provide for her and protect her from further abuse. And the social worker must conduct home visit within 5 days after evaluation because this is a high-risk case. Due to the pandemic, Carla was allowed to stay with her partner. Immediate referral to the local social welfare and development office and to the barangay was done to closely monitor that she remained safe. Regular phone call was also done. Active participation of the LSWTO and the barangay was encouraged through case conference. The PGH-CPU never closed its doors to the service of the abused children even during the enhanced community quarantine. Following all safety protocols, the case management team took turns in seeing clients. This slide shows some innovations in the physical setup of the unit. Open waiting area was built. The extension room that was used to be an activity room was turned into an examination room for children coming from areas where COVID-19 positive are high. There were signages in every room so that people will keep their distance from one another. And another room was built for triaging and mental health screening. The social workers have also made changes to adapt the new normal delivery of services. During the initial evaluation, we call this stage in the case management process at CPU, the intake and safety assessment. Data gathering in this stage is crucial. The social worker and the doctor interview the guardian and the child separately. They need to speak louder because both are wearing PPEs and this could be embarrassing and even humiliating to a child relating her story in a very loud voice, and the room has to be opened as a health safety protocol. This is why the open waiting area on the other side of the unit was built. This is to make children comfortable in telling their stories, making sure their stories remain confidential even if they need to speak louder than necessary. Cheat sheets are glued to a clipboard for social workers to be reminded of the necessary information that they have to gather. Before children are sent home, safety planning is done together with the child and her or his guardian. The doctor explains the result of the physical exam, and the importance of other follow-up appointments are also explained. The parent signs a contract specifying the terms of the follow-up, whether it is online or the child has to come in person. Placing children to a shelter for protective custody is a challenge during this pandemic. All our partners require that a child has to be quarantined or tested for COVID before admission. Budget was then allotted for this purpose, and if there is really a need for quarantine, then a caretaker has to be paid to look after the child in a quarantine facility. Luckily, this never happened yet. Children who needed protective custody were placed in a family-based alternative care like the distant relatives. The relative has to sign a contract that no matter what, the perpetrator must not have any access to the child. Immediate endorsement to the local social welfare and development and the barangay must be done, and if necessary, to the police for protection. Before the pandemic, the social workers conduct home visit at least once or twice a week to do family risk assessment. At present, this is done only through phone call. As pilot project, the CPU, with the help of UNICEF, barangay women's desk persons in 25 barangays were trained in handling child abuse cases. A memorandum of agreement between the LGU that includes the CSWDO, the barangay women's desk, and the city government where these barangays are located, and the UPPGH CPU is on the process of discussion and hopefully the signing of the MOA. The barangay hotspots will be given desktop computer and together with a camera. This will be used for telemedicine. Another innovation in the lending of is the lending of smartphones to selected children with families categorized as high risk. Linkages with other NGOs, Pantawid, CityLink officers, faith-based organizations are also strengthened to help in monitoring. There are no face-to-face conferences today because of social distancing, or because social distancing helps prevent the spread of the virus. So now this is done online, but sometimes the internet connection could be very challenging. We provide prepaid card to our partners when case conference is conducted. There may be difficulties in accessing resources at present, but CPU through the case managers continue to coordinate with the LGU for assistance. For children who need to come in person for follow-up appointment, the barangay or the LSWDO can be requested to provide transportation assistance. If ride is not available, the CPU will try to provide a little amount just to make sure these children are well physically, and food assistance is also being provided when necessary. For the past month, there is an increase in the number of children with suicidal tendencies. Most of the time, medications are prescribed, and we know that psych meds are a bit expensive, and usually medications take months until the child somehow recovers from trauma. Again, with the help of other organizations, the provision of free medicine is made available. And as mentioned earlier, monitoring is done with the assistance of the community leaders through telemedicine. Other innovations in order to keep the case management going and to make sure that human resources are available to provide service, alternative work arrangements are adopted. We are doing work from home scheme, and we also did a Team A, Team B work schedule just to make sure that the CPU will not be closed because all have the virus and needed to be quarantined. Online meetings have become more frequent, and the health safety protocols is strictly implemented. One must not go to work if he or she has symptoms of the COVID-19 virus. Just an update and a plan of action for Carla. For the legal aspect, her sworn statement was already taken and it is now ready for filing. She is determined to pursue legal complaint against her father, stepmother, and stepfather. For the social aspect, we need to explore other relatives who may be able to support her with basic needs, and she can be prepared for independent living and help her go back to school by looking for a sponsor for education. For medical and mental aspect, continuous therapy and treatment of possible sexually transmitted infection as a result of the abuse. Thank you. That ends my presentation. And again, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing those innovations and best practices in CPU PGH. At this point, I would like to introduce to you
to my co-moderator. She's a social worker and one of my colleagues in IJM. I'd like to introduce to you Karen Asuncion for a very short Q&A.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Dolly. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your support and active participation. I hope everyone learned a lot from the insightful presentations of our three speakers earlier. So if you have questions, please type it in the Q&A box below, and for those on Facebook, type it on your comment section. Okay, so we'll try to answer as much questions as we can, but for those questions that won't be raised during this session, our team will do our best to directly answer it on Zoom and FB Live. Okay, so the first question is for Ms. Lisa. I'm going to ask, I'd like to call on the speakers and ask them to turn on their videos, please. So we can see your beautiful faces. May I ask the speakers to please turn on your videos? Hi, okay po. So the first question is for Ms. Lisa. How can social workers do risk assessment or monitor Carla if this happened during ECQ? Yan po.
Yun, medyo mahirap ang pag-monitor, especially ngayon na may ECQ. So what we are doing at present, for example, for Carla, we immediately
do risk assessment or monitor.
we immediately endorse the case to the CSWDO for monitoring, and we also do regular phone call just to, gaya ng sabi ni Dr. Nemia kanina, para mag-check-in lang with the patient kung okay pa siya or hindi. Napagkasunduan namin sa CPU na, yun nga, parang at least once a week, merong phone call sa mga pasyente na may ang category ay high risk, na gaya ni Carla. And then we also do collateral, magko-collateral. Yun yung isa sa mga balak gawin actually kay Carla, kasi we need to locate other relatives that she may have. Kasi medyo unti-unti pa yung pag-disclose niya kung nasan yung mga relatives niya. So yun siguro yung pwede naming hahanapin, at para din makita namin kung meron pang protective na isa or dalawa na relatives sa kanya, kasi considering her case na parang kahit saan siya pumunta, parang naaabuso siya. So yun. And then yung importante din na kasi yung barangay, siya yung pinakamalapit na ahensya na pwedeng mag-monitor doon sa bata. So kakausapin din sila, at pwedeng, yun nga, parang kasi doon sa case management process natin, kung titingnan mo yung role ng mga barangay sa management ng mga cases, medyo limited lang. So dapat alam din nila kung paano mag-interview, paano mag-intervene kapag kinakailangan. So, yun. Dapat din ma-meet minsan ang ginagawa namin ay parang i-introduce yung bata doon sa kagawad or doon sa barangay women's desk person para makampante siya. At kapag nakuha yung trust ng bata, nakuha ng barangay yung trust ng bata, so mas madali yung pag-monitor. Yun. And then may contract signing na kunwari doon sa partner niya na dapat manatili or yung open lang yung line niya for communication na kung sakaling kasi 'di ba suicidal siya, so dapat alam din nung partner kung paano siya mag-respond kapag ganun na yung line of thought ni Carla. So, yun siguro.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Liza. Okay, this question naman po is for Professor Yen. Okay, can you give examples on how a child can participate in the whole process of holistic approach?
Yung child participation, I mentioned it in the context of children's rights, no, as one of the major rights of children. But when it comes to the helping process, it's really one of our principles to engage, to encourage client participation, di ba? It's one of our principles. So sa konteksto kasi ng holistic care for children, we are treating the children as our client. So ina-engage natin siya into discussions, and also we consult the child even if ang age niya 7, 10, ganyan, hanggang 17 years old, merong karapatan ng bata na mag-participate sa decision making. Hindi lang natin siya ilalagay dyan sa tabi at pag-uusapan ng mga adults ang buhay niya, lalong-lalo na kapag tungkol sa kanyang welfare ang pinag-uusapan, no? So decision making, laying down options for the child, and also asking his feelings, his views, opinions. Yun, nag-form part ng child participation sa larangan ng helping process. Doon naman sa barangay, ibang usapin din yun. Kapag child participation, pwede siyang maging bahagi ng mga asosasyon, pwede rin siyang maging bahagi ng mga local structures na nagpo-protect sa mga bata, yung mga policy making structures. Sa home, ganun din, they have to be asked about their opinions also and views. That's part of children's rights, and also that's part of our principles in the helping process as social workers. Yun lang naman po ang basic na pwede nating gawin. Hindi natin sila titignan na mga beneficiaries lang o nandyan lang na, di ba, usually sabi natin, uy, bata ka lang, huwag kang makikinig dito or huwag kang magsasalita. So it's about time kasi nasa batas na rin once yung RA 8425 during the time of Ramos na separate ang sector ng bata sa sector ng youth. Kaya yun ginawa para magkaroon sila ng seat doon sa National Anti-Poverty Commission para ang boses ng bata ay marinig talaga. So, kailan po natin gawin yan. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Yen. Thank you so much. Hi, Doc Nemia. This question naman po is for you. In incest, there is a thing called conditioning. In OSIC, is there also a form of conditioning? The participant who asked this has a case right now where the mother is sending provocative photos of herself to a foreigner friend, and she shows it to her child. So the question is, can we say that this is also a form of conditioning to the child?
Yes, thank you for the question. We've seen both in our cases. So we've seen mothers who condition their children. So we have an For example, we have a mother who actually groomed the child sexually so that when the time comes for the show, the child is no longer afraid and no longer refuses. But we have seen cases as well where the mother just coerced the child to do a show, threatening, oh, okay, if you do not do the show, then you'll stop schooling because you don't have money to pay for the school. So we've seen all cases, all kinds of practices in the spectrum of OSEC. So there's conditioning, and there's from the conditioning, there's also coercion. So and everything in between that spectrum. So depending on the assessment of the social worker, we will really be able to see whether the abuser did some conditioning or whether there was coercion, because we definitely see all of these things happening in OSEC. It's not just conditioning, there's also coercion as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much po. So I think we have room for 2 more questions. This question again is for Ms. Liza. How is the principle of confidentiality observed kapag utilize natin ang barangay or LGU to monitor the case? Ay, Ms. Liza, naka-mute ka po. Okay.
Sorry. Ayan. Confidentiality sa barangay, medyo mahirap yan talaga. Pero yun, hinahanda yung mga partners and yun nga, dun sa mga trainings na ginawa at sa experience ko sa ngayon, ang mga barangays ay, at least dito sa NCR, mukhang aware na sila sa konsepto ng confidentiality. So, medyo hindi na mahirap hindi mo na i-explain ng ganun sa kanila yung konsepto nito kasi aware na sila. Mukhang, di ba sa barangay merong designated desk na maski yung chairman, hindi siya yung parang makakausap doon sa bata kasi meron talagang designated na tao na siyang kumakausap or nag-handle ng cases ng mga ganitong child abuse. So, iyon. Una, kapag, kunwari, sa mga case conferences, so bago i-discuss yung mga kaso or bago pa magsimula yung yung conference, ina-explain na sa kanila na ang lahat ng mga cases na ito ay confidential. So, yun, mukhang naiintindihan naman nila at na po-protect pa din yung mga bata. Thank you.
Okay, thank you po. So for the last question, I think anyone from our panel can answer this one. So in the cases of victims who have case trials po, how can we help the victims during these times, particularly in their court appearances? Lalo na ngayong pandemic po.
Okay, can I answer that, Karen? Because I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
IJM has the experience for this kind of process.
Yes.
We all know that during the pandemic, the courts have also learned how to do online hearings. So this is something that is really welcome because we are able to protect the children from facing their abusers, and they're able to give their testimony online. So we really appreciate our courts for also transitioning to online, court hearings and so on and so forth. The other thing is, as much as possible, we conduct the video in-depth interview of our children so that they are able to provide their testimony without going to court or even without being investigated in this process. So the video is also very helpful. And of course, the practice of IJM to push for plea bargaining, where there is no longer a long drawn out hearing, and so the children are saved from appearing in court and facing their abusers. So plea bargaining means the perpetrator accepts and admits to their crime and pleads guilty, and they are sentenced even without this long drawn out trial. So all of these practices we have seen to be really child friendly.
Thank you so much po, Doc Nemia. And thank you to all our speakers. Salamat po. Again, for those questions that weren't raised this session, we'll try our best to answer it directly. Okay. Thank you. Let's all give our 3 speakers a virtual round of applause po. Thank you so much.